Okay, I can agree with that title. Sonic Forces, released on November 7th, 2017, or 2 days later in Japan. The second part of the Sonic 25th anniversary, but actually a year later celebration, Forces is a sequel to Sonic Mania, Generations, Lost World, and the Adventure era in varying proportions. It's also a very bad game that marked the end of the boost era of Sonic, seemingly validated all the jokes made about the Adventure era, and completely missed the appeal behind the Classic era, making it the rare game which most of the fanbase can agree on, specifically that it was a huge disappointment better left forgotten to the sands of time. Oh, sorry, is that a little bit too harsh for the opening section? I just figured opinions were united enough that wasn't going to get any backlash. Okay, it's not like everyone universally hates Sonic Forces, but it is a very common punching bag in the fandom. Like, the kind of punching bag where fans have debated whether it's worse than 06. I don't think it is. I think 06 is the worst game in almost every way. Note the word almost there, that will be coming up later. But no, Sonic Forces is not the worst game in the series. Frankly, I don't think I'd even put it in the bottom 5. But it is maybe the worst thought-out game in the series, and I have reasons for saying that. Forces began development after Lost World's release under the codename Project Sonic 2017, for reasons I'm sure make perfect sense to someone, with the director and lead designer roles going to Colors and Lost World director Morio Kishimoto, while production was handled by series producer Takashi Iizuka and director for Sonic 06 Shun Nakamura. To be fair, he was also the director for Samba de Amigo, so yeah, I don't know. The game was intended to be darker and more realistic than the more fantastical themes of previous games, presumably because the Japanese developers hadn't seen the American spin-offs that had already done that multiple times. To achieve this, they used a brand new rendering engine, the Hedgehog Engine 2, an engine that, God help me, I can't tell the difference with, other than maybe the lighting's a smidgen worse. Several ideas were planned, scrapped, reinstated, mixed around. At one point, Green Hill Zone was going to be a dark and dreary prison, which would at least have been original. From reading about the development history, it seems like the game's earlier versions were almost completely different from the final product, which makes me wonder what exactly happened to lead to so many changes. I mean, I don't want to say a game that was in development for 4 years was rushed, but if the shoe fits. What I do know is the inspiration for the avatar creation in the game. Yes, truly the oldest joke about the Sonic fandom might be the original character. Obviously, Sonic didn't invent the concept of OCs, that was invented in 300,000 BCE when Grug came and drew a very sexy lady on the wall of his cave. But the Sonic fandom is definitely infamous for its plethora of fan characters, ranging from laughably elaborate to pathetically simplistic. And for the record, no, there's not actually anything wrong with making OCs, including Sonic OCs. Cringe is dead, do whatever the fuck makes you happy. But it is fair to say that in the internet age, particularly the late 2000s, the concept of Sonic OCs became mimetically dunked on. These especially exploded in popularity after Sonic Adventure 2 with the introduction of Shadow the Hedgehog. Remember last review when I mentioned Tyson Heath made a fan comic about the Sonic series and then years later became an official artist and animator for the series? Well, in the last page of that comic, he introduced a riff on Shadow, who's named Original the Character Do Not Steal. Not making that up. And remember, this slight reworking of pre-existing characters to make new parts of the Sonic universe is almost as old as the series. Isn't that right, Aaron the Echidna? Thanks, Ken. So, yeah, I think it's fair to say the Avatar in Forces was directly inspired by the culture of Sonic OCs, which only makes Sega about, a decade late to the joke? The game was revealed alongside Mania in 2016 and released only about 2.5 months after it in 2017, and the response was mixed. Some critics appreciated the game for having big moments and focus on speed and fun, while others thought it was a disappointing mess that fell flat. The fan response was similarly divided. Some believed it was a genuine masterpiece worthy of the adventure titles, while others... see what I said before comparing it to 06. If I had to summarize the game's main legacy in the fandom, it'd probably be the 2 meme lines.
Green Hill's looking a lot more like Sand Hill right now.
None of this is good, Vector. That's why it's called war.
Yeah, that about sums it up. Sonic Forces does have its defenders. I'm sure if you look in the comments right now, you'll see at least one, but let's be clear here. It's not that many people. Apparently there's some split between regions, with the game being better received in Japan than it was the US, which is hard to say for sure without learning a brand new language. But at least from what I've seen, this game is not particularly well liked. And God help younger me, but I really can't argue with general opinion here. Start with presentation, Sorio. It's going to be simple. How deep do you have to go on how a game looks, right? So, I played this game on Switch, partially because it's where I originally played it, partially because I wanted to get it done quick and easy in one day, and partially because I wanted to install overclocked on PC so that copy can't be the base version. And the Switch version... Look, the Switch can run some very good-looking games. Metroid Prime Remastered, Tears of the Kingdom, Luigi's Mansion 3. But it is also a lower-end console than Sony or Microsoft had out at the time, and in handheld mode, its screen is only 720p. So I don't know how the game looks on every system, but here it looks fine. It's better than Colors, and it's stylized better than Lost World, but it's simpler than Unleashed, and the attention seemed to go into the wrong areas. Like having blades of grass sticking out in Green Hill, while pivotal cutscenes have hundreds of clones in them. And not just on the side with the in-universe clones. The visual design is also inconsistent. Some robots are turned more serious and realistic, while others are as cartoony as they were in the classics. Some environments look like they're pulled from the older, grittier version of Forces, and others look like they could have been in Sonic Boom, sometimes within the same zone. And Lord forgive me, the background characters based on the Avatar system don't look great, compared to the established characters or Infinite. I'm sorry, they just don't work. Now sound-wise, we're slightly better off. The voice actors mostly do a great job, with the slight exception of Kirk Thornton sounding weirdly quiet while playing Shadow. Yeah, I don't know why, I guess he's trying, but it's way too low most of the time. But otherwise, yeah, I like the performances. And the music... We have 3 main playable characters, and like in Adventure 2, each character sorta has their own style of level music. For modern Sonic, it's all pretty decent, sorta Colors and Unleashed style. It's just standard Sonic level music, well executed, but not particularly memorable. For the Avatar, we get more vocal tracks, generally lower key, but certainly cool. I really like Fading World, and Nowhere to Run is cool for such an early level. And for classic Sonic, they're trying the Sonic 4 thing again, aren't they? Yes, while modern Sonic songs were orchestral-style tracks, classic Sonic returns to the artificial synths that define the fake retro sound of Sonic. And speaking as someone who's released full albums where all the instruments were MIDI files, I feel like they could have done a better job. Especially since I'm a dork with no friends, and Sega is a multinational company worth billions of dollars, and also they did a better job in other aspects. So, a very mixed bag in presentation, but then that's nothing new for the series. I do like the 3 big image songs for the game. Fist Bump is good cheesy fun, The Light of Hope sounds beautiful, and Infinite is a way cooler theme than the character deserves. But a few good songs can't save a game, just ask Sonic 06 and Heroes. And good voice acting can't either, just ask, well, Sonic 06 again. Where the main bulk of the good and bad can be found comes in 2 places, the gameplay and the story. And for this game, like the Adventure era games, the problems of both are inextricably linked. So, why the fuck does Green Hill look like Sand Hill? As we start the game, we make the choice of difficulty, normal or hard. Hard mode has you lose all rings when hit, but there's effectively no cap to how many rings you can collect. In normal mode, you only lose 20 rings with each hit, but you can only collect up to 100 rings, and your scores aren't part of online leaderboards. Why this is called normal instead of easy, I have no idea, but given my past opinions, I can't exactly disagree with an option to not lose all rings at once. And that name discrepancy might be different in the Japanese version, for the record, but like with all these reviews, I'm reviewing the American localization. It's worth noting some of the issues from the script are better in the Japanese version, at least according to TV tropes. Okay, I don't have a great source here, but apparently the dimension thing isn't as big an issue, Tails losing it isn't brought up, they don't even try to pretend Sonic might be dead. Of course, there are still definitely problems with that version. Probably. Again, I don't speak Japanese. But the English version is the one I'm familiar with, it's the one most of my audience is going to be familiar with, and it's the one that brought back Pontac and Graph, so that's the version I'm critiquing. And whatever version I play, I'm gonna play on hard. I might prefer not losing every ring when hit, but Mama didn't raise no pussy. What am I talking about? Of course she did. Just look at me. We start off with a short cutscene showing Eggman marveling over his latest and greatest invention, and what was the intention here? If the idea was that Eggman created the Phantom Ruby, then why have the tie-in with Mania that clearly shows where it came from? If the idea was that Eggman created Infinite, why did that immediately get contradicted by tie-in media and the game's own DLC? And if the idea is that he created something to join the two together, why is that never actually shown or explained? Later in the game, we have Phantom Ruby prototypes, which implies the Ruby was Eggman's creation that went through scrapped iterations, plus the plot points surrounding trying to destroy the Ruby's power source. But again, this thing came directly from Mania, and it worked there just by being pulled out of the ground. We also have Amy opining over how sad it was that Infinite was born in Eggman's factory, but I mean, I guess you could explain that as her just being wrong in universe. Still, it all leaves the question of what the main villain was fucking talking about in the opening cutscene. What, did he invent the mask? That completely kills Infinite's depth perception? Great invention, Eggman, definitely gonna get Sonic now. We dive into gameplay with Green Hill, or more specifically Lost Valley within Green Hill, and we get back to that question from earlier. Why does Green Hill look more like Sand Hill? Sonic Forces revisits a few zones from previous games in the series, specifically Green Hill, Chemical Plant, the Death Egg, and Metropolis, I think. I believe the intention was that with Eggman's control and/or the passage of time, these classic zones have been changed, with Green Hill being overtaken by desert in certain places, Chemical Plant being cold and repurposed except where it isn't, and Metropolis, this isn't Metropolis Zone. It shares a name, and it's also Eggman's conquered city, but this is in no way Metropolis. Why did they reuse the name for it? As for Green Hill, outside of a single level later on, which is more industrial themed than desert themed, and like a single Sandfall in Lost Valley, the aridification has no impact on the actual levels. It's just a background element that occasionally gets referenced in dialogue. And as for Chemical Plant, 1.5 levels in that zone are themed after the colder and repurposed ideas, and then the other half of our time in that zone just feels like yet another Chemical Plant visit. There is also Mystic Jungle, which is either a jungle that Eggman is turning into a casino, or a casino that's been taken over by a jungle. Depends on if you view the commentary on Sonic's YouTube channel as canon. Now here's the thing. The issues with these zones' presence is not they aren't different enough, or they're too different, or that they don't use their new gimmicks well enough. I mean, yes, those are all issues, but they aren't the main issue with the zones. The main issue is, to put it bluntly, why the fuck are we running through Green Hill Zone again? Look, I love Green Hill Zone. It's the only fully good zone in Sonic 1. It's the only reason Sonic 1 isn't complete garbage that everyone forgot about. But it has been revisited so many times at this point, and by the time Forces released, it was getting stale. Forces is billed as a follow-up to Sonic Generations and Sonic Mania, both of which also started off with Green Hill Zone and then continued into Chemical Plant. And yes, they do try to change things up and there's no reused level design here, but it definitely doesn't help first impressions of the game when the tutorial level is yet another run through Green Hill. And especially when that run-through is 1.5 minutes long. Yes, one of the biggest talking points with Sonic Forces is its length, or more specifically, its lack of it. If you look the game up online looking for complete playthroughs, you'll find that a lot of them are under 3 hours long. We have 30 stages across the game, not counting the fully optional stages unlocked by various tasks, or the 3 DLC stages. Now 30 doesn't sound that small considering that's only one short of Adventure 2, and considerably more than most of the 2D entries. Of course, within that stage count are the 7 boss fights, including a stage that doesn't bill itself as a boss fight, but is, but hey, all those boss fights are substantial. The problem isn't the level count. The problem is that those levels are universally under 3 minutes long. I've had shits that lasted longer than these levels. Yes, most of the levels in this game last somewhere between 1 and 2 minutes, with the longest before the final boss lasting just under 3 minutes. If that doesn't seem that egregious, let me remind you, in Generations, the shortest main level, the very first act you play in the game, has an S-rank time of more than 2 minutes, and as Modern Sonic, the shortest has a par time of over 2.5. The only stages with S-rank times of less than 2 minutes were optional bonus challenges that were designed to be bite-sized. Or hell, why even go that far back? Sonic Mania, a 2D side-scroller with intentionally retro design and a time limit of 10 minutes on beating acts, the shortest act I cleared still took me over 2 minutes. Plus, most of those levels had multiple routes, exploration, experimentation, and also you can play that game 5 different times and have a completely different experience with each. Here, now we can have stages you can beat in less than a minute, basically no exploration for 90% of the level and essentially no replay value. We're Sega, we don't need to put in effort, everyone loves our games, right? Wait, what do you mean 63 on Metacritic? So, yeah, this game is piss easy, repetitive, and weirdly short. What a revelation. But hey, we haven't talked about control yet. We've got a whole 1.5 minutes with this blue blur. How does he play? Well, quite honestly, he's fine. Yeah, I think the modern Sonic gameplay is solid here. This is our maybe penultimate return to the boost gameplay, courtesy of Unleashed, Colors, and Generations. And we have elements from Generations and Colors mixed into our controls here. Basically, we have both the quick step and the double jump. And for what it is, I think the boost gameplay works here. It's maybe a bit too quick, especially in 2D sections, but overall, I think it works. I do have issues, of course, most notably that rings once again do not replenish boost. You only get boost from whisk castles and defeated enemies, though at least now all enemies give you a bit of boost. But without ring boost and without a ring health system for the main difficulty mode, collecting more rings is pretty pointless. Especially since, as with Generations before it, the rings really don't add anything to your stage rank. It's more about time spent and how many times you died, which is certainly worth considering, but it does leave the rings out to dry. Especially with the live system officially dead in the water. Yeah, Sonic Forces is the first game in this series to completely scrap lives, instead just respawning you back at a checkpoint whenever you die. They do track how many times you die, and it's counted at the end of the level as retries. If you have few or no retries, you get a ton of extra points for your score, and if you have a lot, you get nothing. It's a creative enough way to rework the system, especially around a time where extra lives are going out of fashion for platformers. But honestly, I could take it or leave it, especially considering this game's jumps between piss easy and complete bullshit. Once we clear Lost Valley with an audio drama playing in our invisible earpiece the whole time, we get Sonic confronting Eggman in City. Don't ask its name, it doesn't have one. Eggman surprises Sonic with his brand new army comprised of Chaos Zero, Shadow the Hedgehog, Metal Sonic, and Zavok, all under the leadership of Infinite, who's maybe faster than Sonic and is definitely stronger than him. This is what got people talking in the lead up to Force's release. Chaos returning for the first time in over a decade, Shadow rejoining the bad guys, the potential for Metal Sonic to reclaim his hero's intimidation, and Zavok... Well, I guess they did kind of run out of adventure baddies. Zavok sticks out like a dry patch among this crew, and I kind of get the feeling he was only included because Lost World was the last game Sonic Team themselves made. But hey, Lost World had its fans, and at least Zavok is one of the less annoying Zeddy, so sure. And this new character, Infinite, definitely leans heavily into the edge factor, but hey, after so many games trying to be the adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, it's nice to get a little SatAM spice in there. And he proves he's a serious threat, fully beating down Sonic within seconds and thus crippling the good guys. After that, Eggman's basically free to take over the whole world. Apparently. Yeah, Gunn apparently called in sick that month. I guess we only see one side of the planet in game, so maybe they're just on the other hemisphere. That makes sense, right? No? Good, none of this does. After Sonic's supposed death, yeah right, a resistance of his friends forms to try and stop Eggman's schemes. Unfortunately, not Tails though, because...
Tails has just lost it.
Excellent summary, Silver. Also, how the fuck did you get here? Yeah, there's lore to this game you can only learn about by reading the tie-in comic, which mostly came out a month before release. But regardless, Silver is here in a minor leadership role, with the commander being Knuckles, who comes in alongside our brand new character. Us. Yes, the brand new feature introduced for Forces that got everyone talking was the Avatar Creator, which lets you put your own original character in an official game. Assuming your character is one of 7 species. Yeah, the Avatar Creator is unfortunately limited in how it works. We have 7 species: dog, wolf, rabbit, bear, cat, bird, and hedgehog. Each have their own ability, which makes sense gameplay-wise, though it does mean pretty much nobody's gonna play as the bear. And also, aren't dogs and wolves basically the same species? We also don't have a ton of options for the body. We can choose one of 2 genders for our appearance and voice, not that it actually changes much. We have different eyes we can choose from, 2 of which seem to be exclusively useful for joke characters. The colors are varied, I guess, though it's difficult to find a combo that's both creative and good. And of course, the main thing you can change is the clothing, eventually. You start off with basically no clothing customization, but as you complete missions in the game, you unlock new clothing pieces, and my god, it is so much easier to engage with this system disingenuously and sarcastically than it is to engage with it sincerely. Again, I'm pretty sure this whole system was intended more as a joke on the plethora of fan characters than as a celebration of them. Genuinely, who thought the gamer hat would be used seriously? I'm sure somebody has at some point. Probably a very fascinating individual. I'm not a fan of the Avatar Creator, really. It can be some fun trying to make an outfit that actually comes together and looks good, but overall it just isn't deep enough to sink your teeth into. Really, the only thing that got me into it was coming up with dumb stories for each outfit I gave them, like giving them more concealing clothing before they raid the Death Egg. After Knuckles introduces the rookie to Resistance leadership, we make an astonishing discovery. Sonic is actually alive! No shit, Sherlock. He's apparently being kept prisoner on the reconstructed Death Egg, where Eggman has been torturing him all this time. Yes, even in the Japanese version, I don't see it either. Then again, Zavok is the one keeping him prisoner. Regardless, the rookie is sent to Chemical Plant Spaceport to hijack a shuttle and take it to the Death Egg. This gives us our first taste of the Avatar gameplay, and it's interesting. The Avatar has a lot of moves and controls in common with Sonic, albeit modified. We have a wire attack that functions as our homing attack, and the grappling hook we use for it can also swing on certain floating objects and, in a pinch, give us something kind of resembling the drift. We can jump, and if we're a bird, double jump, but we don't curl into a ball when we do it, so we are still vulnerable. Plus, we're a bit slower and don't have the boost, so levels are typically slower. However, the big gimmick for the Avatar is the Wispin, a portmanteau of Wispin Weapon, based on 7 pre-existing Wisps from across 4 versions of 2 games. I will say, if we're going to reuse the Wisps for a 4th time, I do appreciate them coming up with a new way to do it, rather than just giving Sonic the color powers again. though I do find it odd that 2 of the weapons are based on wisps from Colors DS and another are wisp from Lost World 3DS. I guess they didn't want to give the rocket a 4th complete makeover. Each Wispon has 2 different modes, a main attack that can be used at any time, and a special action that you can use after collecting the relevant wisp in level. And each Wispon functions at least a little differently, with their own kind of attack and way of changing things up, so let's go through them all, shall we? We start with Burst Wispon, whose main attack is a flamethrower that can just tear through enemies. Its wisp power allows us to propel ourselves through the air with explosions sort of like a temporary infinite jump. Lightning Wispon gives us a whip that shoots us around the place and makes us temporarily invincible, with its wisp power being a lightspeed dash because of course it is. The Cube Wispon is a hammer that turns enemies around us into cubes that drop rings when we touch them, which is wonky, and its wisp power creates cubic platforms under our feet, which I guess is useful. The Asteroid Wispon is a gun that can lock onto multiple enemies at once and also fire really quickly, and its wisp power makes us temporarily invulnerable and attract rings. Alright, that's good. The Drill Wispon is a drill that you have to mash to go dashing 1,000 feet forward, and in 3D probably off the edge of the stage, with its wisp power letting us grind along the forward walls. Hey, that's just the pink wisp. The Hover Wispon blows enemies away, which is pretty useful, though it's unlocked so late in the game that the floating wisp power will probably never be used. And finally, for being the final boss, you unlock the Void Wispon, which you're probably never going to use because you already beat the game, and why would you want to play more after that? I mean, you also unlock the ability to make secondary avatars after beating the game, which is also a stupid thing to unlock. I don't hate the Avatar's gameplay, but it is undeniably weaker than it could have been. It feels like the Avatar was built to be a combat-focused character, but every standard enemy goes down in one hit from anything, and there are only 2 bosses in the whole game where you can even really use the Wispons. One of those is the final boss, and the other is a 2D boss that doesn't take advantage of the abilities. The Wispons can be used in cool ways, especially in 2D with the Wisp powers, but the core gameplay really isn't strong enough to support it. And it doesn't help that a lot of the Avatar levels have you do QTEs to proceed. It's weird, and what's weirder is that they try to give the player insert character who doesn't say anything a character arc. I mean, it's not like they can give any of the established characters an arc, except they absolutely can and just choose not to. The rookie starts the game as a scared child who runs away from certain death, and ends it as someone who throws himself into the sun to save people, all because Sonic believes in them. Now, I can't say I wouldn't appreciate anyone believing in me, seriously, dear God, somebody care, but I do feel like the story is a bit hampered by the rookie's complete lack of an identity. They're about as generic as you can make a character, right down to having hundreds of clones across the Resistance army. It's not particularly effective, is what I'm trying to say. I don't think the character arc does a ton for the game. After that run through the only visually distinct chemical plant level, we cut over to Tails working on the dead frame of Omega, a plot point that barely makes sense even with the expanded material. Suddenly, he's approached by Chaos and...
Sonic, help me!
Okay, so since Sonic Unleashed, Tails has been undergoing a process TV trope calls badass decay, and Sonic fans call character assassination. I will say, within the context of the other games, it isn't as bad as it seems. Like in Lost World, we do see Tails nearly getting killed by a rogue crab meat that he effectively brought back to life and having to be saved by Eggman and Sonic. And within the story of Forces, it makes some sense for him to have been shell-shocked, seemingly seeing his best friend die right in front of him. But yeah, Tails' role in this game is really disappointing. Like, yes, since Unleashed, Tails hasn't exactly done any fighting, but he's at least still done things on camera that have played a role in the plot. Hell, in Lost World, he effectively saved himself after being kidnapped by the Deadly Six, and at the end, he restores life to the world. Here, he really doesn't do anything worth. To be fair, it's not like any of the other friends do anything special. There's one fight scene near the end where they get a couple hits in, and otherwise all they do is talk. I get that Sonic's friends are controversial, but at least in Generations, you had bonus levels where they actually did stuff, rather than just sitting around and coming up with ways for Sonic to save them. Luckily, Tails is saved from his fate of being inevitably killed by Chaos Zero, when who should arrive in this point of time and space but classic Sonic, straight from the ending of Mania, who kills Chaos in a cutscene and then we never encounter him in gameplay. So, before I start bitching about the death of this game's control, can we just talk about how disappointing this game was as a fan of the adventure games? Like I said before, Sonic Forces was one half of the series' 25th anniversary celebration, the other half being Sonic Mania. This being the next anniversary after Generations, and the two games releasing so close together, plus the emphasis in the marketing on the returning bad guys from prior entries, I, and many others, figured that Forces would be a celebration of 3D Sonic in much the same way Mania was of 2D. Even beyond the returning baddies, the inclusion and emphasis of Sonic's friends, the darker tone the story was implying, the OC creator. Yes, we knew classic Sonic would show up in some form, but I don't think it was unreasonable to expect this game to show the same love towards the adventure games as Mania showed towards, say, Sonic 3 and Knuckles. I mean, imagine brand new fights against Chaos, Shadow, maybe even Neo Metal Sonic. What was the point of the projection characters? At the halfway point of the game, it's revealed that Eggman's crack team of past antagonists is actually just a group of illusions created by the Phantom Ruby, all still as powerful as the originals but lacking sentience. Okay, fine, it wouldn't really make sense for Shadow to be a bad guy again anyways, Chaos is still in heaven or something, and Zavik would probably rather eat Eggman than work for him. Whatever, they're not real, and as much as that undermines their presence, it could still be cool to fight them. But you just don't. There's a boss fight against Zavik, which plays like none of the bosses in Lost World beyond just Zavik controlling another robot, and there's a chase fight against Metal Sonic that seems to be pulled more from the classic-style Metal Sonic fights than anything, but Chaos and Shadow, both dealt with in cutscenes. Not a single fight. Shadow does get his own DLC episode, which is essentially the episode Metal of this game. It's just 3 slightly reworked stages from the main campaign, but Shadow can chain homing attacks on lines of enemies. Well, specific enemies. And the story of the DLC gives contradictory context to Infinite's existence, which serves to just make him feel like a joke. But that's about all Shadow actually gets, which raises the question, why even bring up the adventure games in the first place? This game is not about 3D Sonic, and that's blatantly obvious just by looking at the third zone we hit, City. Yeah, City. There's no name, no callback to the previous games, it's not Station Square or Central City or Spagonia or any of the other cities the series has used in the past, it's just City. The big space station we raid isn't the Ark or Eggman's Space Fleet or any of Eggman's other more recent space installations, it's the Death Egg. We have Mystic Jungle, where the Mystic Ruins already exist, and that jungle has a direct connection to an Eggman base, but nope, never gonna actually make a connection there. We'll mention Seaside Hill once to let you know it does exist, and stuff is happening there, but it's all off screen. At most, we have a few sparse references to the previous games, some acknowledgement that generations happened and that other games exist, but we're not actually gonna focus on it. No, of course not, because what's really important is shoving the Death Egg robot in your face for the 5th fucking time. You see what I mean, right? This isn't a celebration of 3D Sonic, it's just another attempt to pander to classic Sonic fans in 3D. And nowhere is that more obvious, more blatant, and more mishandled than with our third player character, Classic Sonic. Why is this fucker here? Classic Sonic sucks. He just sucks to play. He starts and stops on a fucking dime, the momentum makes almost no sense, he accelerates to top speed in half a second and loses all of it after a single bounce, he needs to either spin dash or drop dash to actually make it up any ramps, it just sucks. Oh, and remember how in Generations they would work in brief moments of camera movement so that things wouldn't feel static and lifeless while playing as Classic Sonic? Yeah, I remember that too. Sure wish they'd do it here. Well, if his gameplay is bad, maybe he serves as a story. Classic Sonic does nothing. He contributes nothing except an extremely forced moment of sadness at the end and being an excuse to keep Tails away from the Resistance for longer. I felt more emotional investment in the romance between Elise and Sonic than I did any of Tails and Classic Sonic's interactions. Do I even have to keep going? I basically hit everything that makes this one of the worst games in the series. 1/3 of the characters suck to play, the levels are uninteresting and painfully short, the writing is pathetically weak and underexplored, and the whole thing reeks of missed potential and broken promises. Oh, and the bosses suck, despite arguably being more substantial than any of the levels. Infinite's first fight is yet another underwhelming chase, and his last is just Metal Sonic's fight again. The final boss is really great, the second phase is the only time they actually take advantage of the unique Wisp and combat abilities, and the rest is just copied from other bosses. The Egg Dragoon sucks, there's a quick time event against a giant snake, the joke fight against the Wrecking Ball is laughably pathetic. The whole game's laughably pathetic. Honestly, who is this made for? Actually, if I can calm things down a bit, I do genuinely want to dive into that question. What is this game's target audience? See, way back in the lead up to Sonic Colors release, Azuka made a comment along the lines of, "It's impossible to please every Sonic fan." He got a bit of flack for it at the time, but the thing is, he's completely right. You just can't. The Sonic franchise has been going for over 30 years now, during which it's pretty much always been targeted at all ages, young and old. We've had an anime, several American cartoons, wildly different comic book series, and of course over a dozen video games. And with all of that, the Sonic fandom has become one of the most varied, diverse, and divided fandoms I have ever seen. You can't please every Sonic fan because every Sonic fan wants something different, and none of them are even wrong. The fan who grew up playing Sonic 1 and 2 and only views Mania as worthy of the originals is no more or less a Sonic fan than the one who grew up playing Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic 06 and thinks Sonic Unleashed is the best Sonic game ever. Even projects that theoretically should bring the fanbase together, like Sonic Generations, can still end up divisive just based on how they prioritize or arrange things. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a darker, more serious take on the story, and there's nothing wrong with having a lighter, more cartoony approach to the setting. The problems don't come from picking one side or the other. The problem is when you try to combine them. You can't please everyone, and the more you try, the more likely it is you're going to please no one. Sonic Team wanted to make a game that could appeal to the whole of the fan base, with elements from all across the series, but what they ended up with is a mess. It's too dark to be ideal for kids, but it undercuts its adult moments with constant quips and a poorly written script. And what you end up with is a game that's just going to disappoint, no matter what angle you approach from. If you come here after loving Sonic Mania, you'll find a plot that fundamentally ignores Mania and classic gameplay that's 100 steps back from it. If you wanted a follow-up to Generations, you'll find that the levels are all neutered, the gameplay styles from that have been shot, and there's barely any extra content. If you were the rare but still existent fan of Lost World, you'll see the game abandon the parkour style and watch Zavik get pushed out of the plot just 5 levels in. If you're a big fan of the adventure games, well, we've already gone into how bad this is from that perspective. It doesn't have the polish of colors, or the scenery porn of Unleashed, or the novelty of Shadow, or the varied playstyles of Heroes. Even compared to 06, as much as that game is thousands of times worse to play, it's also 1,000 times more ambitious, and more importantly, it knows what it wants to be. It's sort of the counterpoint to the other big 2017 releases, isn't it? Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey felt like true celebrations of their series, changing things drastically while still taking the best parts of the past entries and blending them together. Sonic Forces, meanwhile, takes some of the worst of each past entry, pours in the bare minimum for good boost gameplay, and then ships it out the door with a dead meme on its shirt. I don't hate Sonic Forces completely. It has some good levels, the modern Sonic gameplay still works, and at the very least there is potential in some of these ideas. But as a full package, I'm sorry, but no. This is just a plain bad game. So, where do we go from here? Well, here's an idea. How about for the next game, we actually tried to do something new?